Bench Warriors!
Hello and welcome back to the Bench Warriors Network. New show right here. I'm Josh as always. Of course, thank you for watching and thank you for subscribing. This show that I'm going to be doing about once a week is going to be all Broncos, and there's a very pressing topic. If you saw the title and the thumbnail, you kind of know where we're going here in this episode. But there's a very hot topic in Broncos country recently this season. We're gonna get into it. And it's kind of it's enticed me to start a new show so I can talk about these things. And it's a team that I'm pretty passionate about. Obviously, the Denver Nuggets are my favorite team, but the Broncos are near and dear to my heart. And this is a topic that I've been talking about for years. So we're gonna get into it, and it's to tank or not to tank, as the thumbnail says. And this is something that has been, for me, this is something that I've wanted to do. The tank or the put yourself in the best position for the best draft pick. That's something that I've wanted to do since the Super Bowl, since the Trevor Siemian era of the Broncos. My friends, they were getting very irritated at me because I was always the ones cheering for losses. I know that's hard to say as a fan, but it's okay, Broncos country. You can be a fan of a team and still want them to lose if it's setting you up for the future. So I'm going to get into it, kind of just break down my opinions on the whole thing, and players that we move on from, just kind of how that process looks, in my opinion, how I would do it if I was the GM. Because for those of you who don't know me, my favorite thing to do, my favorite thing about sports, whether it be basketball or the NFL or even baseball, my favorite thing, I love going to the games. I love watching the games, consuming content, podcasts, shows, all of those great things. But my favorite aspect about sports is the building the team, how the GMs think, how the coaches think, the scouts think about building a roster, what they need, building that philosophy of what their team that they want to build. That's what I love. I love that whole process. I love talking about the draft. I love talking about free agency and all of that. I mock up my visions for what a roster would be if I was a GM. I love doing all of that. So we're gonna get into it. The tank. Yes, of course, obviously, players are not going to tank on purpose. Players may, by the end of the season, if they know that the season is done and over with and it's a lost cause, they may start making business decisions. But I know, and I think it's a little disingenuous to think that those of us who are in favor of a tank are saying, yes, we think the players are going to tank. No, that's not the case. It's just, at least, especially from my perspective, it's about the mindset that I believe the GM and the coaches and the coaching staff should be in and get themselves into. Because the theme of this whole thing is there's a sickness in this franchise, and Broncos country, it's time to take your medicine. We've been putting it off. We've been band-aiding things for far too long. I mean, if you just look about the quarterbacks since Peyton Manning, Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Brock Osweiler, Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, Drew Lock, Jeff Driscoll, Brett Rippon, Teddy Bridgewater, and now Russell Wilson. John Elway did a lot of great things for the franchise when he was GM, but I think one of the worst things he did was get this mentality and breed this mentality within Broncos country, within the franchise, within those four walls of that building, that all you need is mediocre quarterback play to win a Super Bowl if you have an elite defense. That's what happened with Peyton Manning. And I think that's the wrong message that Broncos country and the Broncos front office and the not ownership group, but the panel that they had controlling the team beforehand got into their heads, was that you can win with mediocre quarterback play if you just build a great roster around him. But that's wrong. We've seen now, and I hope Broncos country is starting to see, you can't do that anymore. You can't keep going for the mediocre quarterbacks, the cast-offs, the hand-me-downs. like the Peyton Mannings and the Matthew Staffords and the Tom Brady's, where they come in and you win a Super Bowl that first year by getting a quarterback that the other team wants to get rid of. That is very rare. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. And we tried it with we tried it with Case Keenum. That didn't work. Another mediocre quarterback. Then we tried it with the shell of Joe Flacco, the artist formerly known as Joe Flacco. That didn't work. And then we tried it with Teddy Bridgewater because Vic Fangio just wanted a game manager quarterback. We had Drew Lock on the roster. I still think that Drew Lock got screwed by this team and the franchise because Vic Fangio just did not like Drew Lock, and he wanted his guy Teddy Bridgewater, so he did everything he could to put Teddy Bridgewater to win that starting job in that quote unquote quarterback competition that really wasn't a competition. But this is a plague that started then, and the reason the Broncos are in the position they are now, where they had a terrible season last year, and now they're sitting at 1-5 heading into a Green Bay Packers game, and just lost to a Chiefs team on Thursday night who were not taking the team seriously. And if you seriously watch that game and think that the Chiefs were taking that game seriously and were trying their hardest to win, I'm sorry, but that's just not true. They were doing trick plays, and they were horsing around. They weren't trying their hardest. They were using it as a glorified practice. But again, this is a plague that started from back then with Peyton Manning winning the Super Bowl with an all-time defense. There's a reason that Broncos defense is considered one of the greatest of all time. And it's because they were able to carry that team in offense that was pathetic the whole year and win the Super Bowl. Yet, people don't mention that you still had Peyton Manning. Yes, physically not there anymore. His arm was gone. But you still had the mind of Peyton Manning the quarterback position. And then Brock Osweiler was a pretty good backup to come in and spell him when Peyton Manning was hurt for a few weeks. But it started there, and this is why we're in the position we are now. Like, it's trying to push off the quarterback position and not go through a rebuild, and that's why we're in the position we are now. We kept trying to put in Band-Aid situations, and then we have no depth. There's no depth on the roster right now. And that's because you traded away so many draft picks for Russell Wilson. And you traded away more draft picks for a head coach because, Russell Wilson didn't work with Nathaniel Hackett. So it was all Nathaniel Hackett's problem. And we just need a head coach. When we got Russell Wilson, because we were only a quarterback away. But then after last year, now we're just a head coach away. So we traded even more draft picks for a head coach. And now there's no depth on the roster. There's a serious lack of blue chip talents. Like, if you really think to yourself, how many blue chip players are on this roster? And I'd probably only say one, and that's Patrick Surtain. Justin Simmons, I would say at one point was, but I think the injuries and the age are really starting to pile up. And that's the problem. We have a very expensive roster. I believe we have the third most expensive roster in the NFL right now. We have the most expensive wide receiver room in the NFL and nothing to show for it. And this is what happens when you keep trying to put Band-Aids on a disease and push off a rebuild. This team should have went through a rebuild years ago. I mean, imagine where we would be if we actually put ourselves towards a rebuild a few years ago. We could have had Joe Burrow right now. We could have had Trevor Lawrence right now. Like, there's so many better quarterbacks we'd have, and we would be in such a better position as a roster if we would have done what needs to be done now years ago. And what needs to be done is you need to move off a lot of these vets, a lot of these big contracts, get what you can for them, and you need to start over. You need to build a new foundation and find the young players that you think are going to be here when the Broncos are good again. Those are the players that need to stay. If you don't think Justin Simmons is going to be here when the Broncos are good again and competing for deep playoff runs and a Super Bowl, I'm sorry, you got to let Justin Simmons go. And a full rebuild like this is going to take a couple years. And that's why I'm using the theme of it's time to take your medicine, because we've been pushing off the medicine for years. We've been pushing off the medicine for years, and we finally just need to take it. We're going to be bad for a few years, and that's okay. There are some media members who will say, well, why would you try and be bad for a quarterback when there's so many other holes to fix on this roster? I'm sorry, but the idea of tanking or the idea of being really bad this year and going to get that franchise quarterback, because as it stands right now, there's 2 elite quarterback prospects, like everybody's talked about. I'm sure you know if you're watching this. Drake Maye and Caleb Williams sitting at the top. Very deep quarterback class after that as well. But those are the 2 top guys that I think most people think can be those franchise altering quarterbacks. Caleb Williams is considered a generational guy, and Drake May is more of that Josh Allen, Justin Herbert vein. Still very good as a prospect. But putting yourself in the best position to go get one of those guys. First of all, a franchise quarterback plugs a lot of holes or makes up for a lot of holes on your roster. As we've seen with Patrick Mahomes, we've seen with Aaron Rodgers. We see it all the time with franchise quarterbacks. They don't have the best rosters, but they're still able to contend for deep playoff because they're that great. And if one of these guys are who a lot of scouts and draft experts think they are, then those are the type of franchise quarterbacks you get. So 1, they fill a lot of holes, and 2, probably the most important thing is that the idea of going to get a quarterback this year, that's not for the current roster. That's for your future. You can't keep trying to just plug holes on this house when, if you look at the franchise and the roster as just a house, the foundation is bad, the framing's bad, the roof's bad, we got a leak in the bathroom, we got light bulbs that are going in and out. Like, it's a disaster right now. And going to get a quarterback, the idea of that and being bad to go get one of those potentially generational guys isn't to fix this roster. The idea is to demolish this house, find the pieces that you're going to build around, like Marvin Mims and Joel McLaughlin. I'll get more into the players that I think will be here and that you can keep to build around in the next episode in a few days. But you need to find those pieces on this current roster, and that's your frame. And your foundation is going to be that quarterback. You go get that quarterback, you build that foundation, you get a rock solid foundation in this house. You start putting up a frame with the Marvin Mims and the Joel McLaughlins of the roster, and then you start to find, okay, what's next? Now we need to put up some drywall. We need some insulation. And that's where you start drafting players, and you do what you can to move off some bets to get more draft capital. And it's going to take a couple of drafts. It's going to take being bad or pretty bad for a couple of years, probably 2 or 3 years, where if you put the right people in place and you have faith in George Payton, or you have faith in whoever the next GM is that Sean Payton selects, or if Sean Payton's not here, the next GM that the ownership puts in place. So if you have faith in the owners to pick the right guys to draft and build this roster, then you need to let them do their job. So you need to get them as many picks as they can, go get that generational quarterback, and then let them draft and draft well. If they're doing their job right, they're going to be drafting well and hitting on 50% to more of your draft pick. So the more ammo you get, the more darts you can throw at the board. You let them build those pieces and build this roster. So then in 2 or 3 years, then you can be contending for deep playoff runs and Super Bowls again. And it may not even take 3 years. And if you just look at the Bengals in Joe Burrow's second year were contending for a Super Bowl. Look at the Jaguars. The Jaguars were one of the worst teams of all time, had one of the worst head coaches of all time, kind of similar to the Broncos, not historically being terrible, but the period of being really bad, having one of the worst head coaches of all time. Doesn't sound like Nathaniel Hackett. And then they went and got their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, had that bad year with that terrible head coach. Then they got their head coach, to build a system for Trevor Lawrence. And our Trevor Lawrence is looking like what we thought he was going to be, a generational quarterback prospect. And the Jaguars are a potential playoff team, and we're probably going to make the playoffs this year. And they made the playoffs last year and won a playoff game. That's where the Broncos can be with a franchise quarterback. And that's why you need to put yourself in the position to go get that guy. So, yes, it may hurt. You may have a Jerry Jeudy jersey, a Cortland Sutton, Justin Simmons jerseys. Rule of thumb, don't buy jerseys for players that I have a rule to not buy jerseys for current players or players that haven't done historic things with the franchise or haven't been here for a while. Like I have a Jamal Murray jersey, so obviously he just won a championship, so that's fine. My Broncos jerseys are more historical players, like John Elway, Terrell Davis, obviously. But if you're buying jerseys for young players, you're just setting yourself up. Heartbreak. I'm sorry if you have a Jerry Jeudy jersey or a Patrick Surtain jersey or Justin Simmons, but these are players that you need to move off of. Patrick Surtain, that's a separate conversation. He's really the only player on this roster that you're going to get a lot for. But you need to find those players, move off the vets, just get draft capital. Yeah, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Simmons, Garrett Bowles, Josie Jewell, if a team's willing to pay for him, DJ Jones possibly as well, because these are all players that I don't think will be here. And the Broncos are contending for Super Bowls, are contending for deep playoff runs. They're just not. They're on the wrong side of 30, or they're getting to that point, and their contracts are bloated on most of them. It's just time to move off. It's time to a lot of these vets have been here through all the time of being bad. None of these guys were here when the Broncos were. So they don't know how to win yet. So let these players, have mercy on Justin Simmons. Let him go to a contending team. Let him be around other players that are on a winning situation, so he can learn how to win and be in a situation after he did his duty in terrible years with the Broncos. So all this is just to say that it's time to start. Everybody gets the heebie-jeebies when you say tank, but it's time to start thinking about the future. How's that? It's time for the head coaching staff. If you think Sean Payton's going to be here, if Sean Payton thinks he's going to be here next year, if George Payton thinks he's going to be here next year, I don't think so. But George Payton, for the betterment of his job, the ownership, top down, the front office, and that organization needs to start getting in the mindset of thinking about the future. This year's lost. You're not making the playoffs. Any win from this point on is just a meaningless win. So many times through this period since Peyton Manning, the Broncos have won that meaningless game. I remember the Brock Osweiler win against the Colts, and these wins just put the Broncos just outside of the area, the top 3 or top 4 or the first pick to get that quarterback. They always manage to win a meaningless game that knocks them out. This is a very good draft, and especially with two elite quarterback prospects at the top of this draft. You need to do whatever you can to put yourself in that position. And the players are not going to quit. The players are not going to be fine with the tank. They're trying to get film. They're trying to set up film for the next team they're going to be on, because they probably know they're not going to be on this team. But it's time for the coaching staff, the front office, the GM, the scouts, and the ownership to change their mindset. I know the ownership, they probably feel like they spent billions of dollars on a broken house, and they just keep tearing things down and finding something else wrong. There's termites, there's mold, all of this stuff. The ownership, and I have faith in the ownership, and they have money to throw at any problem that they have with this franchise. But it's time for the ownership to take the steps that they need to build a foundation for this roster. Stop band-aiding the problems. This is what you get. What we are, the steps where people are like, no, don't waste a pick on a quarterback. Go draft an offensive line. Go draft a pass rusher. Go get some vet quarterback, some hand-me-down quarterback that the team's getting rid of. And they never think of, why is this team getting rid of this quarterback? It's time to stop with that, because this is what you get when you do that for years. I mean, we saw the Chiefs do that for so long. I mean, as Broncos fans, we saw that happen with the Chiefs. I have Chiefs friends, and they went through periods like this. And it's like, we saw this. And now we know firsthand of where this gets us. So, Broncos country, we need to stop going and do it. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We've all heard that. It's feeling really insane right now because this is the same thing over and over again. George Payton tried to throw a dart at the wall, get Russell Wilson, but again, hand-me-down quarterbacks. We need to stop with this. We need to get a franchise quarterback. Look at how the good to great teams in the NFL right now. They have young quarterbacks. Imagine where we'd be with Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence or Patrick Mahomes or any other young quarterback. Where we would be right now, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, if we had one of those guys, and then we can build the roster around them. We keep spinning our wheels, and it's time to finally just move off it. Russell Wilson, I know everybody was saying, oh, he's playing great. His numbers compared to Mahomes this year. The last 2 games, Russell Wilson has looked really bad. I came into this season, I predicted 5 wins. I over-predicted. I don't think the Broncos are getting anywhere near 5 wins this year. But coming into this year, I predicted 5 wins because I had the opinion that Russell Wilson was shot. I'll admit Russell Wilson looked better in those first few games than I thought he would. But I do believe that was all completely fool's gold. I don't think Russ is completely gone. I think Russell Wilson is a good quarterback. I think you can win with Russell Wilson. But I think there's 3 types of quarterbacks. There's the quarterbacks you can win in spite of, the quarterbacks you can win with, or the quarterbacks you're going to win because of. And I think Russell Wilson is just about that quarterback that you can win with. But those aren't your franchise guys. Those are your Alex Smiths, your Andy Daltons. That's what Russell Wilson is right now. And he's 34 years old. Like, to win with Russell Wilson, you need to have an elite roster. Russell Wilson on the 49ers, great. I mean, he's looking probably better than Brock Purdy right now. But the Broncos are nowhere near having the roster to compete with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has not been the problem, but he's not the answer for this franchise. You need to move off Russell Wilson, and you need to go get a quarterback because that new quarterback's not going to be for the current roster, and he's not going to be to win for this year, next year, or the year after probably. It's for your future. The Broncos are Russell Wilson and the Broncos are not on the same timeline. There's just no way the Broncos are going to build a good enough roster to compete with Russell Wilson while he's still at this level where you can win with him. He's no longer the quarterback you're going to win because of. And as we kind of saw that now we're seeing with the Pete Carroll and that defense and that running game, he may have never been that guy, to be honest. Russell Wilson may have always been in that quarterback you can win with tier, probably at the very top, like right on the edge. But I'm starting to think that Russell Wilson never was the guy that you can win those elite franchise quarterbacks. But regardless, he's not that guy anymore, if he ever was. So it's time to move off of him, to rebuild this roster, build the foundation, and that's why I know it sucks. It's bad to wish, it hurts to want to see your team lose. But that's what needs to happen. I know there's people saying that, well, it's a gamble in the draft and why take your shot? Well, what's the alternative? The alternative is what we've been doing. And that just doesn't work as we've seen. So if this doesn't work, having an elite defense, because for most of those years since Peyton Manning, the Broncos have had an elite top 5, top 10 defense. Top 5 most of those years, and sometimes top 3. And it didn't work with mediocre, casting down quarterbacks. So to win a Super Bowl, though, people look at the Peyton Manning of 2015. They look at the Trent Dilfer and the Nick Foles. But the reason you remember those names is because they're the exceptions. That they're stories because their teams were able to do that with them. So it's a process that we need to get out of. We need to rebuild the foundation with a young quarterback. Broncos have never invested a high-end draft pick at quarterback. Like a top 10, top 5. Jay Cutler wasn't. John Elway, they traded for. They never drafted him. But that worked out. Obviously, John Elway, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. The Broncos need to invest in a high quarterback. Throw him out there. See what you can get. Build a system around him. Put players in. If he doesn't work, Yeah, that's bad. It sets you back a couple years. But guess what? You got to keep swinging. You can't always keep trying to go for singles and get the cast me downs. To win games, you need to go for the home runs. And to win in the current NFL, you need a franchise to compete with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert in just the division, just the AFC West. But then the rest of the AFC to compete with the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence now, just to compete. Now, CJ Stroud's looking like he might be on that level in a year or two. Just to compete with those guys in the division and then the conference. Just to get out of the conference, you need a quarterback to go. Because, yes, people like to say defense wins championships. The NFL's changed. The most important position in all sports is the quarterback. You need to do what you can do to put yourself in the best position to go get that quarterback. Might it be a lottery ticket? Sure. Might it fail? Sure. But what we've been doing isn't working anymore. And we need to realize it. It doesn't work. And we need to take our medicine, be bad for a few years, and fix the toxicity in this roster and this franchise and rebuild. The Broncos were never meant to be this bad. The Broncos have a history of success and getting to the Super Bowl and playoff rounds, winning playoff games. And where we are now, it's bad. And where we've been for a few years, it's bad. But guess what? We were bad the last few years. We just weren't bad enough. And that was with trying the mediocre quarterbacks and trying to win. So what would it have hurt to lose 3 more games, 4 more games some years to go get one of those quarterbacks? Those were lost years anyway. Did you get that much joy out of beating the Colts with Brock Osweiler? Sorry, but you're not going to remember that game. I remember it because I remember it as the day that knocks the Broncos out of the top 5. I believe that was the Baker Mayfield Sam Darnold draft. Yeah, as we look at those now, those quarterbacks weren't worth it, but that's just one of those opportunities where we knocked ourselves out of taking that chance. Who's to say Sam Darnold wouldn't have been more of success in Denver than he was with the Jets, where we saw how much of a train wreck the Jets were. Quarterbacks failing there. But this team was never meant to be this bad. This franchise, should say. And we need to stop spinning our wheels. We need to take our medicine. And we need to fix the problems that have dug themselves into this franchise. In Broncos country, we need to realize it's going to be rough. It's going to be a rough couple years. This is what needs to happen. Players aren't going to tank, but the franchise, the coach, the GM, and most importantly, the owners need to realize the house that they built a great foundation in a great neighborhood. This franchise is historic, one of the marquee franchises in the NFL. They bought a great piece of land in a great neighborhood. And they just need to go tear it down, tear the abandoned house on the piece of land down, and start it.
Bench Warriors!